This now gets us to the respiratory and the cardiovascular system. Lungs are a pair of sponge like organs filled with air. They embrace the heart in the thoracic cavity. Lungs harvest gases, especially oxygen from the atmosphere, into the blood, which then they deliver it to the cells. They then use that oxygen to make energy, ATP, and the cells then can get rid of gaseous waste, especially carbon dioxide, by exhaling it through the lungs. And we see that here, what we see here, a pair of lungs. We can see how the oxygen comes in and how the carbon dioxide leaves the lung as sort of the main gases that get exchanged. And then also down here, what I have is a picture of showing that the alveolus, that's the air part that brings oxygen into the red blood cell, and carbon dioxide leaves through the airways back out into the atmosphere. And we call that external respiration. And then when we get through the blood into the cell area, we're going to have the oxygen move from the blood cell into the body cell, and there the wastes, the carbon dioxide, can leave it. And you see that right here. And so we call that then internal respiration because it happens inside the body. To move air into the lungs, which we call inhalation, mainly the diaphragm contracts and pushes downward, lowering it, and then this increases the chest cavity, creating a suction force, which is a negative pressure. And then air passively moves into the lungs to balance out that pressure difference. And we can see that right here. We can see how, there we go. I've got to go down a little bit. You see how here's the diaphragm right in here, that muscle down here. And that will, when it contracts, actually here it's when it's up. And then when it lowers it, it flattens out, and that increases the chest area and lung air comes in. We also have in primary inhalation, we have muscles in between the ribs. They call them the external intercostals, and they also help bring the chest cavity up as well. And then, if we want to take a deep breath, we have accessory muscles like the ones around the neck here, and then also around the chest area on the side. And they often are muscles that move stuff around, but then they can also help expand the chest a little bit more when they pull on the chest. And so then we can get more air into it. So that's the inhalation, bringing air into the lungs. And the reason why we can use the chest and expand the chest and then the lungs flow with it is because the lungs adhere to the chest cavity. And we call that a pleural membrane. Pleural, whenever you see the word pleural, it refers to lungs. And the pleural membrane is a continuous membrane that surrounds the lungs and then the chest wall. And we name those in the lungs. We also have some around the heart and some around the gut. But we name those in the lungs the visceral and the parietal pleura. And look at that. You could see that right here. So what's interesting, it is one membrane that you can see here that goes around the outside. That's the parietal part. And then it goes around the inside, and that's the visceral part. And you can see right here that membrane, it's a continuous membrane. You see how it turns around here. It doesn't stop. And so that then creates inside, the space there inside is filled with fluid, and that allows both things, the gliding of lungs, which is great because if we breathe and things are moving, you don't want to be stuck, and that hurts, right? But it also creates that suction, and the suction holds the lungs against the chest wall. And when the chest wall expands, it doesn't collapse. And so you can see that right in here. You can see when the ribs expand and they go outward in inhalation, or the diaphragm goes downward, this membrane, this internal pressure difference, that suction allows the membrane, the lung itself, to be attached to the chest wall. or contracting. Breathing is controlled by brainstem respiratory centers that respond to stretch receptors and parietal pressures of gases, and particularly the carbon dioxide. The other ones too, like you see here, they are measuring multiple of them, even the acidity, but the carbon dioxide is what really is responds quickly, and then the stretch receptors as well. Activities such as speaking, singing, or swimming, though, can override the involuntary reflexes. And you know that you can hold the breath. The brain can override those, but there is thank God there's a thing that we don't have to think about. Otherwise, it would be hard to sleep. When we then look at the airflow, the air enters the body into the nasal cavity, and there it is warmed and humidified by a membrane, a mucous membrane, and that makes it more suitable for the lungs. And you can also see how you got these, they call them the turbinates, they're little flaps that come out, and then the air, as the air comes in, it sort of turbulates, it makes it circulates it, it slows it down, and then the membranes that are on top of the turbinates, they call them conchas, but turbinates fine for this. We don't need to worry about the word. But the membranes on top of that, they have a lot of vascular vessels in them, and they can both warm the air, but then also reabsorb the air when we exhale, and reabsorb some of the warmth and capture some of the warmth back. And so that's kind of interesting as well. And then from there, air passes through the pharynx, which is the throat. And we can see that right in here. You can see these three colors here. Those are three pharynxes. Well, it's one pharynx, but we call the area behind the nose the nasal, the one behind the mouth the oral, and then below we call it the hypopharynx. Below that, then, we have the larynx, and the larynx is the voice box. And this is this area right in here is the larynx. And that voice box divides the air. Well, the tube, the pharynx, carries both air and liquid, and a bolus, the food as well. And the larynx is the place where we separate the air from the food. And we got this epiglottis right here. You can see this flap right in here. And when we swallow, the flap goes down and covers the trachea, the opening here, the larynx, sorry, covers the larynx, the opening here, and then the food bolus goes in the back into the esophagus. And so that's sort of the mechanism there. And if you're joking, that's when accidentally food went into the wrong pipe. And that pipe it goes into is the windpipe right here. And that's the trachea. We call that the trachea. So don't joke. And the trachea is made out of horseshoe-shaped cartilaginous rings that provide strength and support, keeping the trachea open. So the trachea is where we breathe air through. And so it's kind of like in your dryer, where the dryer air goes out, that pipe is usually a wire around it to be supported and kept open. It's the same sort of thing. The air it can't just have to push open that pipe. We have to have that pipe be open, and that's done by these tracheal rings. And you can see these tracheal rings right here. You can see them right in there, and they're horseshoe shaped rings because they don't connect in the back, and that's reason is so that the esophagus has room to expand into it when a bolus is swallowed. And you can see that right here. You can see how the ring here, that's the cartilage ring, that's the tracheal ring. And back here, you see the esophagus, that's in the back posteriorly. And when we eat some food, that bolus goes down and the esophagus can expand into it and the food can go down. Otherwise it'd be like ripples going down, and that would be kind of weird. But that's pretty ingenious. And then in the front, those are covered up. The trachea then divides into two primary bronchi entering the right and the left lung. They divide into secondary and tertiary bronchi, getting progressively smaller, ending in the terminal bronchioles before reaching the alveolar duct. And you can see that right here. You can see Actually, on the right side, we got what we talked about so far down to the pharynx. And then here now on the left side, we get to the bronchi or the bronchus for one. And we have that primary first, and then we progressively get smaller as we get, as you can see right in here, and we go down the bronchial tree until we reach, the smallest ones, and we call those the terminal bronchioles. And from there, then we go into the alveolar duct, and then that looks like a stem for then a bunch of grapes, and the bunch of grapes are the alveoli. That's where we have then, that's where we have then the gas exchange. Bronchi and bronchioles are reinforced with cartilage and smooth muscle, which is controlled by the autonomic part of the nervous system. The fight or flight part will relax them, those bronchioles and bronchi, and the rest and digest part of that nervous system will constrict. So we got these two extreme parts. One is like fight or flight, like it's a sympathetic one that tells you to run away. That's when the body is prepared for danger, when it needs to react and be need as much air coming in as possible. That's why those bronchi dilate and get bigger. So that's why it's the fight or flight. I put fight or flight there because that is more descriptive than the word. And then the other one is the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's the rest and digest. And that's when we eat the turkey dinner, when we're relaxing, when the body regenerates and gets energies back. And so when it replenishes the energies. And so we need both of them. The more fight or flight we have, the more those dilate and get bigger. And the more rest and digest sympathetic nervous stimulation we have, the more those bronchi get smaller and constrict. I know. Attached alveoli then are these thin grapes that we just talked about. They're thin-walled and in direct contact with capillaries. And you can see that right in here how this is one alveolus, and you see how this is a grape round structure, and the capillary hangs right around it. There. And then this intimate contact ensures diffusion of gases, and oxygen moves from the alveolus into the blood, and carbon dioxide goes to reverse. And so we can see that here, how the oxygen comes down from the air right in here, and then it goes into the blood vessel. And the carbon dioxide moves from the capillaries into the alveolus, and then from there it can exit and we can breathe it out. Good. Well, that brings me to the cardiovascular system.